Hey everybody, and welcome to week 14 of our Piano Dojo weekly proficiency series. Today we're going to be doing the usual syncopation warm-up. We'll be checking out our second inversion blending table, and then we're going to take a look at a piece of sight reading music that I wrote today that is going to take a look at sort of the principle behind inversion blending, which is voice leading, okay? And we see this type of writing a lot in hymns, right? And so we're going to take a look at a hymn today that I wrote that kind of shows how inversion blending is voice leading is inversion blending, and we're going to dive into the vast world of four-part writing, all right? So without further ado, let's go over to the drum and get rhythmically warmed up. Okay, let's get started with our week 14 rhythm warm-up. We'll be starting on line 1 with the metronome at 50 BPM, and it will be representing the downbeats. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Get ready to change your hands. Here we go. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3. Hands together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, and. Excellent. There we go. Let's move on to line 2. We'll turn our metronome up to 55 BPM, and now the clicks will represent the upbeats. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, 3, and 4, 1, and 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and switch. 1, and 2, 3, and 4, 1, and 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, and 2, and hands together, top line. 1, and 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Excellent. Moving on to line 3, we'll be going at 60 BPM, and we'll be turning our metronome to halftime. So our metronome will be clicking at 30, and that is going to represent the upbeat of the 1 and the 3. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, and here we go. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, and switch hands. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2. Hands together, top line. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, and 4. There we have it. And last but not least, we'll check out line 4. We'll turn our metronome up to 35, which means we will be going at 70 BPM with the metronome at halftime, and it will be representing the upbeat of the 2 and the 4. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and switch hands. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and top line. 1, 2, 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Excellent, there we have it. Now that we're all rhythmically warmed up, let's head back to the piano. Let's take a look at our inversion blending. Now remember, as a refresher, this has to do with all of the chords that are adjacent to each other on the circle of fifths, all right? We're starting on D flat today, and we are gonna begin by going around the circle of fourths, which means we're going counterclockwise. Then when we get to this end, we'll go back and we will be going around the circle of fifths that way. So when we ascend and descend through the table, we will end up playing both ways around the circle, okay? Remember, we have our pattern of root, second inversion, first inversion, root. And that's why we have 3 tables, right? Because each table gives us 4 chords that are going to be in root position. There's 12 total, so with 3 tables, we'll have a chance to play every chord in root position, and today we're doing our second one. Now remember, the cool thing about chords that are adjacent to each other on the circle is that they share a note, right? So the notes in red are always going to stay the same because those 2 notes are shared between those chords, all right? And the other notes don't move very far, right? We'll always have 1 note that moves by a half step and 1 note that moves by a whole step, all right? So without further ado, let's take a look at this on the keyboard. We're going to want to start this out with hands separately, so we'll take a look at our right hand first. We're going to start on our D flat chord, and then we're going to go up to our G flat. From G flat, we'll go up to B, and from B, we'll return to a root position of E, right? Now we'll open our hand back up to A, we'll rotate it around to D, and we'll close our hand back on G. Open our hand up to C, rotate around to F, and close our hand back onto B. Open our hand on E flat, rotate around to A flat, and then finally we're back up to D flat, where we'll go backwards. So now we're going to go down to A flat, rotate around to E flat, and we'll close our hand onto B flat. Open our hand back down to F, rotate around to C, and we'll close on G. Now we're going to open our hand down to D, rotate around to A, and close it on E. Open it back down to B, rotate around to G flat, and then that finally brings us back to D flat major. All right, let's try it with our left hand. So we're starting on D flat, we open up to G flat, rotate around to B, and then we close back, root position E. We're going to open our hand back up to A, rotate around to D, and then that brings us to a closed position on G. Then we're going to open our hand back up to C, rotate around to F, close our hand back onto B flat, open our hand back up to E flat, rotate around to A flat, and then that brings us back to D flat. And then we'll go backwards. All right. Now remember, before you put hands together, make sure that you have it solid at hands separate because it can be difficult to coordinate 6 fingers simultaneously, right? But if it is coming easy to you, because we all have our different strengths and weaknesses, then you're going to want to make sure that as you go through this exercise, that not only you're able to do it by memory, but also that you're able to say the chord that you're playing. So this time through, I'm going to go through and I'm just going to say the names of the chords as I do them hands together. Here we go. So we have D flat, G flat, B, E, A, D, G, C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat. Coming back, we have D flat, A flat, E flat, B flat, F, C, G, D, A, E, B, G flat, and D flat. All right, of course, as usual, I'm going at a medium tempo for the sake of time, but you can take your time with this, all right? And now, let's take a look at today's sight reading. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a very big advocate of practicing slowly. And that's why in my hymn that I wrote for today, I am commanding you to practice slowly. Thou shalt practice slowly, all right? Now, here's the thing about hymns, all right? They are very, very dense pieces of music, as we're about to find out. That's why I only subjected us to 8 measures of hymn writing today, because almost every single beat in a hymn has a different chord, all right? So these are loaded with information. Now, when you think about a hymn, you'll notice that the stems of all the notes are facing in different directions, and that is because it's pointing out that each one of these lines is its own separate voice, all right? So in a hymn, we call the bottom voice the bass voice, all right? The next one up is the tenor voice. Above that, we have the alto voice, and then finally at the very top, we have the soprano, okay? Now, typically, these can be sung, right? So if you were in a choir and you were a bass singer, you would be reading all of the notes on the bottom with the stems facing down, right? If you had a little bit of a higher voice, you would be singing the tenor voice, which is right here, just above the bass voice, okay? Again, if you had an even higher voice, you might sing the alto voice, all right? And finally, if you're a massive diva, you will be singing the soprano voice up here where the melody is, right? Now, we've talked a lot about melodies, and we've talked a lot about bass voices, right? We've talked what basses do, we've talked about what melodies do, and those are really exciting. But the inner voices are sort of our unsung heroes of music, because when you hear what an inner voice does, it's not always the most exciting, and in fact, sometimes even as you can see here, good writing for an inner voice doesn't move much. So the less motion you can get for an inner voice, and even if you can stay on the same note, the better. It makes it for a not very exciting part by itself, but the way that it glues everything together is spectacular. So they're very important. The tenor and the alto voices are very important voices. Now, the thing is that as we've been studying chords, we've kind of been thinking about them as these things that we're just plopping down on the keyboard, but we want to remember that in real life, chords don't necessarily exist just by themselves, because what happens is usually we have different lines of music, we have different instruments, we have different voices that are playing simultaneously. And when you happen to take a slice, a vertical slice of what's going on in that texture at any point in time, you can break that down into a chord, all right? But the interesting thing is how chords are really the product of horizontal voices moving together and harmonizing, and that when we analyze them by taking slices and saying, okay, at this point, what would we call this? That's when we get chords. Let's get started on looking at the harmonies of this piece. So you'll notice that we're in 3 flats, and 3 flats is E flat, that's right. And so there's no better place to start a piece than on the 1, we have an E flat. Now moving on, we're gonna skip this for just a second and notice that we're going to a 6 here, all right? The minor 6, because we have C in the bass and E flat, and then we have G, and that spells a C minor chord. Now we do see that up here in the alto voice, we have an accidental, and that should set off a red flag that we're dealing with a secondary dominant, all right? And so what we have there is the 5-7 of the 6, all right? The G7 that comes before the C minor, all right? Moving on from the 6, we're gonna bring us to the minor 2, all right? Because what we can see is we have an A flat, a C, and an F A flat C is an F minor chord, which in this key is our 2. All right, and that will bring us back to our minor 3. All right, so a lot of minor chords going on right here so far, but our minor 3 is the G minor chord, and we can see that we have the G, we have the B flat, and we have also an F. So if we wanted to, you could say that it has a 7th scale degree in it. All right, we return back to a 5-7 right here, and that will bring us back to a 1. All right, so let's take a look at how exactly that happened. Now, remember, our 5-7 is a B flat chord with an A flat in it, which is the 7, and that's what we see right here. All right, so we have our B flat, we have a D, and we have an F, so there's our triad, and then the A flat is what gives us the 5-7, and of course that brings us back to a 1. Now I do want you to notice that because this 1 is in the middle of the piece, it's not a settled 1. It's a 1 that has a 5 in the bass, and so technically we could call that the 1-6-4 that we've seen before, the cadential 6-4. It's a more unstable version of the 1, and that makes sense in the middle of a piece because we're not finished. We don't want to bring you home yet, all right? So moving right along, after that little pause, our first cadence of the piece, we're gonna see again our minor 6, which is our C minor, and then back to the minor 2, all right, which is our F minor. Moving on from there, we do see that we're gonna be playing around with the 5, all right? And what happens is that we have a 5 suspended to a 5-7, and then that leads us to our 1. Now, what does that sus mean, okay? The sus means that we are delaying the middle note of the chord, the note that tells us if it's major or minor, right? In this case, we have a B flat, D, and an F, all right? And that D right here, we're delaying it. And we're delaying it with this note, with this E flat, all right? And so that little delay is why we call it suspended. And then we do end up adding this A flat right here, which is ultimately what makes it a 5-7. So we're kind of playing around with the 5. You don't have to give it all at once. You can suspend the sound of the 5, then you can add a flat 7, and then finally you can bring it to a 1. This 1 that we're on is still not the most stable type of 1 that you can get, because as you notice, in this case, we have the middle note of the chord in the bass, the G, all right? And we can take advantage of that, all right? Because in our next line, we're gonna want to get to our minor 6. And of course, we can see that we have this accidental of the B natural. We've seen that before. And what that signaled to us was that we had the 5-7 of the 6. And so again, we're gonna have that 5-7, the secondary dominant of the 6. It's kind of a popular choice that I had for this piece. All right, and that's sort of our surprise chord that tells us this piece isn't over and that we're still gonna proceed onto the 6. All right, now we are heading to the 1 right here. And so what takes us to the 1? The 5-7 does. And when we see two notes squished together, kind of like this, that's always a good indicator that we do have a 5-7, because that is the Do and the T, that 7th scale degree, squishing up against the 1st scale degree. They're right next to each other, all right? So we have our B flat, our D, our F, and our A flat for the 5-7. We have a little passing tone right here, and that's gonna bring us back to the very first statement that we made in this piece. This is sort of the very first thing I composed that sort of crystallized this whole piece. You know, with a 4-part writing, usually once you come up with an idea, you use the logic of how the voices move in order to form the rest of the piece. And that's why I wanted to bring this idea back, because it is the main idea of the piece. So again, we have our 1, we have the 5-7 of the 6, we have our 6, and we have our 2, all right? Now that is gonna bring us back to our 1, but it's the unstable 1. It's the 1 that has the 5 in the bass, and that usually leads to a 5-7. And finally, check it out, we're gonna see a 1 sus again, and finally our 1. Now what is the 1 sus happening here? Well, it's happening in our tenor voice, because as you notice, we want to have this middle note. We want to have that mi, the G in this case, E flat, G, and B flat, right? But we delay that gratification by playing all around the G. We have the A flat, then we go down below the G to the F, and then finally that brings us up to the G, and that's what will finish our piece. Now, we're not going to get too into the weeds of four-part writing. It is a very difficult form of writing because there's a lot of rules about how the voices can move, such as things like you should avoid parallel fifths, or you should avoid parallel unisons. You know, there's a lot of things like that. We're not going to get too into that today. I would definitely encourage you, if you're interested in four-part writing, to look deeper, and I will definitely provide some links in the comments below. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to put our hands on this piece and see how it sounds, all right? Now, one thing you can do when you're practicing a hymn is you can practice playing it one voice at a time. So if you were to look at the soprano voice, we just have a nice ascending scale. And then we kind of go back down. It's always nice to hear the melody, all right? You can also try doing just two voices at a time. So for example, if I just wanted to play the bass voice with the soprano voice, you could do that like this. Okay, and you can see how already when those two voices are lining up that they're already starting to imply harmony and they're sounding really cool. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all four of the voices together, and I just want you to notice how this is very similar to the table of the inversion blending that we're working on, because these notes are all blending together nicely. They're not moving in any weird intervals like that. They're taking advantage of half steps and whole steps, and even staying in the same place when they can have a common tone between multiple chords, all right? So take this nice and slowly, just like the lyrics and the name imply, and it will sound something like this. There you have it, and if you want a bonus, you can sing along with those very uplifting lyrics that I wrote for you there. But anyways, we're almost finished now with this unit. We have a few more scales left and only one more inversion blending table. Remember, you can purchase all of this sheet music, guide outlines, and more at the Piano Dojo shop at pianodojo.com. And happy practicing. I'll see you next week.